Monsters of Mican. This has to be one of the strangest dungeon crawlers that I have ever seen. And thanks to the solo dev at Blankitt Productions, awesome picture by the way, love the dog, who has been working on this game for over 2 years. I was provided with a free copy of this game to check out for you guys. And I've got to say that when I first came across this game, I thought that it was just going to be a strange game that would make for an interesting video. But this was genuinely a lot more fun and addictive than I expected. And while the game is not perfect by any means and does have a lot of scuff, as a fan of old school blobbers like the Wizardry and the Might and Magic series, I actually found that this was a very enjoyable experience. Plus, I mean, I'm pretty sure that majority of the scuff is on purpose. I mean, you just listen to these sound effects. This is meant to be a strange game after all. So Monsters of Mican is a first-person dungeon crawler that is meant to be challenging just like the other classics from this genre and appeal to the hardcore dungeon crawler audience, as the game is a love letter to old school blobbers. But at the same time, the game presents itself as a whimsical journey that mixes humor into the overall gameplay and also just makes it rather easy for casual fans of dungeon crawlers to jump in who might not be as familiar with classics like the Wizardry series, which makes this game a pretty good starting point for those who might be looking into dipping their toes into this older style of dungeon crawler, as many newer fans of the genre might struggle to actually try out an older game as brutal as like the original Wizardry games. They didn't exactly hold your hand. So what exactly makes this game so strange? Well, I mean, for starters, there's a sandwich. Get it? A sandwich? All right, screw you, that's funny. Look, I love the puns in this game, okay? Throughout the game, you're actually gonna find a lot of weird enemies like this, over 250 of them to be exact, which I'm not 100% sure if that's just from the base game or if that also includes the extra 80 plus enemies that are from the free expansion, which by the way introduces 3 huge new dungeons to the game. But either way, it is a lot of enemies. Also, every single one of these enemies, except for bosses of course, can also be captured and relocated to an area where you can see all of your new monster friends roaming around, which every single one of them you can actually talk to and even summon them to fight during one of your turns in a battle, as long as your monster lore skill is high enough. It's a pretty cool little system, which has led to me trying to capture any of the monsters that just look really cool, but it also makes the system even more in depth if you try to min-max it, as not only is there 250 unique monsters in the game, but all of their traits are somewhat randomized, which can completely change resistances of a monster or how they even behave in battle, which makes the combat feel a bit unpredictable at times. Apparently there's also a monster arena where you can make the monsters battle each other as well, but I haven't found that yet. But there is also a thing called the Micapedia? I think that's how you pronounce it, I'm not too sure. But essentially it's a Pokédex to catalog all of the monsters that you fight, which I thought was pretty cool because I'm often curious what kind of strange creatures that the developer has come up with, and sometimes the camera doesn't really do the enemies justice, or they're just too close to other enemies and just kind of clip into each other, so you don't really get to see their full design. But with the Micapedia, you're able to completely see them in 3D along with all their animations, which I thought was a pretty neat little touch. There is a reason for the weirdness of the monsters in the game. There is a lore thing behind it. It kind of leads down a very strange rabbit hole, and I'm going to try to avoid spoilers as best as I can, but I am going to give you guys a brief explanation. So, the game takes place in a world known as Mican, hence the title of the game. Specifically, the town that we find ourselves in is called the Albright Outpost. It's a small town with all of the essentials that you need. It has a tavern, a library, a wizard tower, a trainer, a temple, blacksmith, and a weaponsmith, and your general merchant store. When you start the game, you can choose to do the prologue, which I would honestly recommend doing, as it does show you the basics of combat and some of the backstory. But if for whatever reason you decide to skip this, you can talk to the locals in town to learn a lot of the backstory, which I would also highly recommend, purely just because doing so can provide a lot of helpful tips for the game, and they might just give you something very useful the first time that you deplete all of their dialogue. Well, we can immediately learn about the monsters from both the prologue and from one of the town's locals known as Brigadier Jenny, is that the dungeons in the mountain next to the outpost burst open somewhat recent, which caused many of the monsters to start revealing themselves. These creatures ranged from the usual undead and goblins that you see in a lot of fantasy games, all the way to the weirder amalgamations that were created by an event known as the Amalgam Anomaly, which births a large variety of new monsters into the world, which may or may not have been caused by a potential threat that is, you know, hidden deep inside the mountain. And according to Jenny, when the monsters did start to attack the town, she mentioned that she doesn't think that the monsters actually wanted to invade the town, and that they even appeared to be just just as shocked and afraid as the town folks were. I'll let you figure out the details for yourselves if you're interested in the game, as I don't want to spoil anything, but yeah, that's the reason behind the strange creatures scattered throughout the game, and now it is up to your party of 4 to venture into the mountain's dungeons and find out what the monsters are up to, see if you can find any possible third party who might actually be controlling the monsters, and put an end to any potential future disasters. The dungeons themselves aren't visually anything too crazy, but they are full of traps and secrets to find, which made exploration a lot of fun, at least until you accidentally run into a group of enemies that is near another group of enemies, and then you accidentally aggro both of the groups, which now suddenly you're in a turn-based battle against 20 monsters with randomized traits. So yeah, that's always fun. As I mentioned, the combat in the game is turn-based with a small meter at the bottom right, which shows what order that your team or the enemies go in, and the combat is actually pretty challenging. Again, this is a game that is based on the older games in this genre. The randomized monster traits and the resistances, which don't seem to always be the same between two of the same type of monster, can lead you to needing to check on their resistances pretty often. And because enemies tend to stack on top of each other, it can sometimes be kind of hard to tell which one that you need to attack when you're trying to get rid of the monster that is either healing all of the other monsters or buffing them. Also, I thought this was pretty interesting, but the game doesn't punish pausing the game or using consumables at all. So you can actually use nearly any item outside of wands without it counting toward your turn, which means that if a party member is low on health, you can actually just go into your inventory and spam heal any of your party members as long as you have enough potions to actually do it. In terms of your classes and skills, when you start the game, you're able to choose between 14 classes, with each class having one unique ability that is exclusive to that specific class. Honestly, I would recommend that you don't worry too much about what class that you play and just choose whichever unique ability seems to be the most interesting, as you are able to visit the library in town and learn any skill on any of the characters for a small fee. So if you choose a class, you're not locked to anything specific, which is pretty nice. And as of right now, I'm unaware if there is any level cap or anything in the game, so as long as you're willing to put in the time for all the grinding, then you should be able to max out any character however you wish. If I am wrong about this, though, please feel free to correct me, and I'll pin the message at the top of the comments, but as far as I'm aware, yeah, there's no limit to a level cap or anything like that. I'd also like to mention that if anyone wants to go with the Jester class for its unique ability, just proceed with caution. The game is a very pun-heavy game, as you can tell with a lot of the monster names, and with the Jester tossed into the mix, the gods in the game might not be too fond of all of the extra puns that are tossed in. So yeah, I kind of stumbled on this the hard way, and I regretted my decision immediately. On top of the 14 unique class abilities and the option to train your party to be able to use basically any skill, there are also hundreds of abilities and spells which range from conjuring a useless flower, or, you know, creating a light to help you find all the secrets, you know, that might be hiding in a wall or something, all the way to actually creating walls and teleporting and a hell of a lot more. The magic system is also pretty interesting, as it doesn't work the way that most of us have grown familiar with in modern RPGs. Everyone can cast a spell regardless of if they're a mage or not, but not everybody can cast as many. The magic system seems to be based off of some kind of corruption system, so instead of starting with 100 mana, for example, you'll start at 0. Each spell has an MP cost and will add to that 0. And based on your spellcasting stats, once you reach your quote-unquote max MP usage, instead of not being able to cast spells anymore, the game will allow you to keep casting, but the price of actually casting the spell is now doubled, and it pulls from your health rather than your mana. So for example, if the MP cost for a spell is 15, once you are over that threshold of, you know, corruption or whatever they call it, I'm not too sure what they call it in this game, then that 15 MP spell now costs 30 HP to cast, which can lead to some interesting situations or some very irritating ones if you haven't been paying attention to your MP and, you know, your character's health is already low. And of course, your weapons and armor do play a pretty important role, which is, I mean, that's pretty obvious, but before you start immediately jumping into the dungeons, I would recommend stopping by the store to get some potions and, you know, weapons and armor pieces, which, small tip, but if you do need more potions at any point in the game, all you need to do is when you go to the general store and you buy out their stock for, you know, health potions, just leave the store and re-enter and everything will be fully restocked. Also, Also, loot is randomly generated as well, so you can also try to farm gold or XP rather easily if you wish. And once you've cleared a floor, if you're struggling to make it to the next floor, then what you can do is you can activate the lion statue in town next to the town portal, and it will actually reset all of the enemies for the entire dungeon for you at the low cost of 1,000 gold, so that you can endlessly grind to your heart's content. Also, another thing that I want to mention, there are various rarities for gear, including unique artifact gear. This artifact gear is not like artifacts in Elder Scrolls games, for example, where there's only one of them. You can actually come across the same exact artifact many times, either through just random looting systems or just from visiting the shop, which restocks every time that you return from dungeons. Overall, my time spent with Monsters of Mican has been very pleasant, and there's been many of those just 5 more minutes situations when I need to get up and go work on something, but my curiosity just gets the better of me, and I want to see if there's any hidden treasure behind another wall in the dungeon. It's a very strange game for sure, but I feel like it adds to the overall charm of the game, and I loved that while the game is fundamentally a challenging old school style dungeon crawler, the game doesn't really take itself seriously, and the god tier sound effects made this surprisingly a lot more fun than I originally expected, and it makes me curious to see what else the developer might conjure up one of these days in the future. Overall, my experience was a positive one, but there was a few negatives that I would like to point out. For one, the game doesn't feel that optimized in some locations, especially in the Spinewood Forest, where I noticed many FPS dips, but I would like to go on record and say that my computer is pretty outdated. I am running an RX 480. It's an old graphics card. So for most people who are running a somewhat, modern PC, you probably won't run into any of these issues, but I still wanted to mention that just in case. And even though I did have some FPS dips, the combat itself is turn-based anyways, so it didn't really impact any of the game at all for me. There were also a few bugs that I ran into, such as sometimes, for some reason, the load order for saved games on the main menu will reverse randomly, which has led to some confusing situations as to why I'm missing a lot of progress, but I mean, it is a bug. I'm sure that it'll get patched out at some point in the future. But anyways, that was Monsters of Mican. Let me know down in the comments what you guys thought about the game, and if you're a fan of first-person dungeon crawlers, let me know what your favorites are, as I genuinely am curious to see what you guys have to say. I know visually Monsters of Mican is not going to be everybody's cup of tea, but this is one of those games where, at least for me, the gameplay really stood out and had me hooked for many hours. If you guys have watched this video till the end and you liked the video, then maybe give this video a like and subscribe for more videos, maybe like this in the future, we'll see. Once again, big shout out to Blankitt Productions for providing me with a free code for this game, that way I can make this video. If you guys would like to check this game out for yourselves, I will have the link down in the description where you can get this game either on itch.io, Steam, or on Epic Games. And with all that said, again, thank you guys for watching, and I will see you guys in the next video.